What I want to do with you today is to study a prayer, a poem really, from the High Holy Day prayer book that is likely familiar from your High Holy Day attendance experience. If you've spent time in a synagogue, or at least in many synagogues on the High Holy Days, you've read or heard or listened to or sung the Unatana Tokef prayer. And so I want to study it today and ask ourselves the question of, is there hope in the Unatana Tokef? I'm going to share my screen here. I will invite you to join me in the blessing for study. If you'd like, you can unmute. Oh, before we do that, please put your name and location into the chat as we do every week. It's always nice to see where everybody's coming from. That way we get to greet each other. We get to know who we're studying with. So if you'd like to unmute, let's join together and say this blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the one whose mitzvot make our lives holy and who commands us to immerse ourselves, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. So let's take a look at a prayer that, as I said, might be familiar to you. I've grabbed this from the prayer book and put it on the Word doc in front of us. This is the prayer that's called Unatana Tokef. The words Unatana Tokef come from the very opening words of the poem, which say Unatane Tokef Kedushat Hayom. If you have heard it sung, you might recognize the melody. Unatane Tokef Kedushat Hayom. I see a couple people singing along with me, either choir members or people who've been in enough services that you recognize that melody. It is a very powerful moment of both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services. It is a very powerful, very disturbing piyut. The word piyut, I'll put in the chat actually, it's an interesting Hebrew word. It means essentially a hymn or a liturgical poem. The word piyut, which is a Hebrew word, is actually related to the word poetry. You can see the relationship between those two words. So is this a prayer? Maybe. It is a poem. It's a medieval, actually Ashkenazi poem that appears in the High Holy Day liturgy in the Ashkenazi Rite. This is not in the Sephardic tradition. It's not in the Mizrahi tradition. And it is really only about 1,000 years old. So, we've been saying this for a long time, but maybe not for as long as we've been saying the Shema and some other prayers. And yet it has in many ways become a central moment of the High Holy Day liturgy. And particularly this part, we're going to read the whole thing in a moment, but this part, it's probably familiar to many of us. On Rosh Hashanah, it is inscribed or written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. Who shall live and who shall die? Who by fire and who by water? A lot of us can quote this. We might know parts of it. We might know songs based on it. I think about Leonard Cohen's song that's based on this. It's just a really important and really disturbing piece of the High Holy Day liturgy. By the way, just as an aside, kind of a fun fact, when I was first learning how to be a rabbi, one of the very first things that we had to do, rabbinical students, you have to go out into the world and lead high holiday services. You've been a rabbinical student for 2 weeks and they send you out to lead high holiday services at some synagogue somewhere in the Midwest, because I was in Cincinnati. And one of the first pieces of advice they gave us, and I remember it was from Dr. Richard Saracen, who we might look at some writings of. Dr. Saracen said, when you're saying who by fire and who by water, don't make eye contact with anybody in the congregation. And that is important advice that I've lived by for the last, at this point, 25 years. At any rate, I want to read the Unatana Tokef together. And I want to ask ourselves what this is doing in our liturgy, how we feel about it, whether we want it in our liturgy, and where the hope is to be found in this poem. So it starts off by saying, let us proclaim or give power to the holiness of this day, for it is tremendous and awe-filled, and on it your sovereignty will be exalted. Your throne will be established in loving kindness, and you, and we're talking here to God, you will sit on that throne in truth. It is true that you are the one who judges and reproves, who knows all and bears witness, who inscribes and seals and reckons and enumerates. You remember all that is forgotten. You open the book of records, and from it all shall be read. In it lies each person's insignia or signature. Sometimes you see the word, it bears the signature of every living soul. I'll read one more paragraph and then we'll stop and talk about it. A great shofar is sounded, a still small voice is heard, and the angels tremble, and dread and fear shall seize them as they proclaim, Behold, the day of judgment on which the hosts of heaven shall be judged, for they too are judged and not held blameless by you. All who come into the world before you like sheep before a shepherd. I should actually say pass before you like sheep before a shepherd. As a shepherd considers the flock when it passes beneath the staff, you count and consider every life. You set balance, you decide destiny, you even ascribe judgment. Oh, all right. Let's stop and talk about this for a moment. What does this bring up as I read it? What image is being put forward here, and what does it have to do with the High Holy Days? Help me parse this poem a little bit, please. Bob, please.
Well, if we're looking for hope, there at least is a sense of fairness here. And every creature, if you will, is judged. I mean, the shepherd is a positive image and all this kind of thing, and yet the nature of the decisions to be made are pretty heavy-handed. And I was just reading something on some internet connection that I get about an attempt to close down a sheep slaughterhouse in Denver, with a law coming up on election day, and that's not such a great image for the end of the sheep. But at least it's fair. I mean, the angels are being judged as much as are we here on earth. And I don't know if you can hope for more than that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Bob. So we have a sort of a mixture of images here, right? You have God as king. It's not necessarily my language for God, but I, some of the language up here, it says here sovereignty. I mean, kingship is really what you've got there. You've got God as judge, and then you've got God as shepherd, which I somehow managed to spell wrong down here. Which again is a shepherd is a mixed image because a shepherd takes care of you. A shepherd, or of the sheep, right? The shepherd guides and takes care of and watches over the sheep. But we also have the image of judgment here, sort of the innocent's not the right word, the powerless sheep being judged by the much mightier judge or shepherd. So we have this kind of mixed imagery, some of which could be comforting, and other of which is quite stark and challenging. Susan, what do you see here?
Well, the first thing I and the insane cat here saw in the first verse was that it suddenly reminded me of the Kaddish. Because in it we are exalting God. But that was just that. And then I thought of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. And mostly I did not see, although it comes later, watch out, if you do bad, you're dead.
Yeah, so the Psalm 23 is a good point, because that is a place where the image of God as shepherd is meant to be quite a comforting image. I'll also point out your reference to Kaddish is a really important one. Kaddish, the word Kaddish, comes from a Hebrew root Kuf Daled Shin, which means holiness, right? We have a bunch of words in Judaism that have that same root. Kaddish, Kiddush, Kiddush is the sanctification or the making holy. And then we have the Kiddusha, the sanctification or the making holy of God. We declare God's holiness. The Unikana Tokef comes right in the middle of the Kiddusha. Where you go kadosh, 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 you go up on your toes. This is actually the introduction to the Kiddusha, to the blessing of God's holiness in the High Holiday liturgy. So what does it mean to declare the holiness? And it even says here, let us declare the Unatane Tokef Kiddushat Hayom, let us declare the holiness of this day. Well, the holiness of this day then has something to do with judgment, with decree, the decree of each person's fate. And we have here that very famous image, that very, foundational image of the book of life, right? God opens a book, inscribes and reckons and enumerates and writes down about every single human being. That's in some ways the central image of the High Holy Days. Dr. Richard Saracen, who I mentioned earlier, writes essentially a version of that. He says this poem powerfully dramatizes the Zichronot theme. Zichronot means remembrances, God remembering our actions. Theme of Rosh Hashanah as Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, on which all creatures pass before God as in a military muster. And he points out that language comes from the Mishnah. It describes in rather harrowing images how the book of memory, in which each person's deeds are inscribed, is opened on this day, and how everyone's fate for the next year is inscribed on Rosh Hashanah and sealed on Yom Kippur for life or death, for prosperity or suffering. So I think that needs to bring us to our middle paragraph, which again, if you're in the choir, you probably know how to sing it, maybe 2 or 3 different melodies, right? Berosh Hashanah yikatehevun, uvyom Som Kippur yechatehemun, or maybe you know one of the other melodies. Either way, we sing this. We sing it to a sort of a very, very somber melody that I think plays up the gravity of what's being said here. On Rosh Hashanah, it is written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. I want us already to think about the idea that it's being sealed. How many shall pass away and how many shall born? Who shall live and who shall die? Who in good time and who by an untimely death? Who by water and who by fire? Who by sword and who by wild beast? Who by famine and who by thirst? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangulation and who by lapidation? Who shall have rest and who shall wander? Who shall be at peace and who pursued? Who shall be serene and who tormented? Who shall become impoverished and who wealthy? Who shall be debased and who exalted? But repentance, prayer, and righteousness, or charity, tzedakah, avert the severity of the decree. In Hebrew, this is poetry. It has a little bit of a poetic feel in English as well. These are often, a lot of these are pairs that outline the stark, sort of the starkness of life, death, wealth, poverty. Most of us sit in between wealth and poverty, right? Most of us sit in a place where sometimes we're sick and sometimes we're not, right? The world is, other than alive or dead, the world is not always so black and white, but there's a sort of a starkness to this. And then it ends on the note of repentance, prayer, and charity and avert the severity of the decree. So this paragraph starts by saying that it's written and sealed. Sealed, sealed means it's done, right? Once a letter, think about the image of how letters were sealed in ancient times, or even pre-modern times. You had a piece of wax. You would put your seal, your signet ring, into the wax, and that was how you knew that the letter was sealed. And once it was sealed, it was done. It could not be reopened and rewritten. And so we start off here with an image that whatever is decreed on Yom Kippur is sealed, is done. It's an image of incredible helplessness. We cannot control what God will decree. Once Yom Kippur is over, you're done. Your fate is sealed. But then it ends by saying that tshuva, tefillah, utzdaka ma'avirin et ro'ah hagzerah, that tshuva, repentance, prayer, and charity can temper or avert the severity of the decree. So what's going on here? How can the poem say both at the same time? How can we have this image that we are both helpless, our fates are being sealed, and also that there are things we can do in the world to make it a little less bad, so to speak, to temper the severity of the decree? What does it bring up for you as you read this? Any thoughts? Vicky, please.
It took me years to be able to sit and listen to this because it was and it still is difficult for me to hear. But I participated in groups where you rewrite it to yourself or anything else. But it does give you a sense of hope that we can take action unto ourselves to through the repentance prayer and tzedakah to change our ways and behavior to uh, maybe to appeal to God or to just here to be part of society and make ourselves better and do better. So it's an action. By actions we can temper what's going to happen.
Mm.
And maybe reverse our course in what's this. That gives me some hope.
Yeah, thank
But
you, Vicky. So there's some agency here, right?
right.
You start off with an image of helplessness and you end up with an image of agency. I see Jody, please, and then Bob, and then Cheryl.
Hi. When you substituted the word charity for righteousness, it just occurred to me that maybe this suggests that we can avert the severity of the decree not only for ourselves but for others. That our charity and prayer can help soften other people's fates as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I really think that is part of what's going on here. And the word, it's a hard word because tzedakah means righteous. It comes from the word tzedek, which means justice or righteousness. But tzedakah is righteous giving, as Paula just put into the chat. So this is the giving to others. So one way to understand this is if I give tzedakah, maybe God will go easier on me, right? That's the sort of the reward and punishment way to understand this. But the other way to understand this could be that repentance, prayer, and righteous giving are ways that we go about making the world a little better.
Right.
And so in that sense, you have, I've always thought that this paragraph, it speaks really to two ways that we as humans feel. We humans often feel helpless. You can't control when you get sick, when you lose a loved one. We can't control what happens to us, right? The world in some ways happens and we don't have control over that. And that is a fact of being human. But we also do have all kinds of agency in terms of how we act within the parameters of what's handed to us in the world. And the way, what is that agency? How do we actualize that? Often through repentance, prayer, and charity. And repentance is the ways that we think through our actions and learn from our mistakes and do better and go about making the world better and ourselves better. Prayer, I think, is both about talking to God, but it's also about being in community, building supportive community around ourselves and around others. And then righteous giving. These are, I think, exactly the kinds of agency we have in a world that we can't always control what goes on around us. So I see Bob and then I see Cheryl.
I'm not so sure I feel very good about this. I mean, it's very prophetic in the sense that there are all of these terrible things being listed, and then barely at the end of the reading, there's something to pull it back from total awfulness. And it, you know, reminds me of the whole process of Yom Kippur, the entire day, and the affliction of one's soul, and just hoping to survive until Ne'ilah. I mean, if you can just get through the day, that's a good sign right there. But this particular part is pretty depressing.
Fair enough. It's a hard image. And because of the hardness of this image, some more liberal prayer books in more recent times have chosen to leave it out. One of the best examples is Isaac Mayer Wise, founder of Reform Judaism, or sort of the organizer of Reform Judaism in North America back in the 1860s, left this out of his prayer book. And yet, for whatever reason, and this is probably where the conversation we'll have at the end, for whatever reason, we have not been willing to leave this imagery out of our prayer book, even though it is disturbing. And I would suggest that in some ways, that's the duality of this paragraph, that there is both the deep helplessness and also the agency. The idea that, there's so much that we can't control, and also the reminder that there is so much that we can control within the parameters of a world that's larger and more powerful than we are. Cheryl, please.
So this has never been a part that I've liked. It always makes me squeamish. To think that these things are foretold. And especially this year with October 7th. It just horrifies me that was known ahead of time, that was going to happen. And I think about it like, but repentance, prayer, and tzedakah could have made that better. Well, why didn't we know? Why weren't we given warnings so we could have done something? And then I started thinking, well, maybe repentance, prayer, and tzedakah did make it better. Maybe it could have been worse. And repentance, prayer, and tzedakah made it better. We don't know. It may have been. Two different places that over Rosh Hashanah, two different organizations, when they did this prayer, interspersed lines that were specific to October 7th, which was both shocking and very meaningful, and made me really think about this whole thing of really applying it to life, to to what happens to people specifically. And it was even more disturbing to me this year.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Cheryl. Thank you. I want to suggest another reading, actually. And I hear what you're saying. That is the really disturbing thing about this. The idea that, are we bargaining with God? Would it have been worse if we hadn't prayed, and given charity? Is our tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, is it a version of bargaining with God? I read it differently. My reading of this is that repentance, prayer, and charity are what we do as human beings after bad things happen. I'm thinking about Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. some of you have talked, we've had this conversation before in various classes. The book is not called, what's important about the book is what it's not called. It's not called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, which is to say there's so much we can't control and predict. What it's called is When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which is to say, what do we do when bad things happen to good people? And I wonder if repentance, prayer, and charity are what happens after the terrible things happen, the ways that we pull community together, the ways that we support other people, the ways that we build support around ourselves. Maybe that's how it averts the severity of the decree. In a world where bad things do happen, what control do we have? We have the control of thinking about our actions, trying to learn from what we've done and build a better world. We have the control of praying and building spiritual lives and building spiritual communities around ourselves. And we have the control of giving to others in the wake of all the bad things in this paragraph. Those are the kinds of agency that we do have in the world. I, for one, don't think we're bargaining with God at all. I think that we are being reminded here of the power we have to repair the world, even when really bad things happen in the world. So we're near the end of our time here. Ellen, go ahead. I think you get almost the last word.
Hi. Well, I think that the purpose of it's like a threat that people need to behave themselves or else this is going to happen. And I think this comes from the fact, it sounds crazy, I could be way off, that back in the day, they didn't have a structured legal system outside of their Judaism. They had a lot of superstition with not understanding science and why things happen. And they didn't have police around to police you when you misbehaved and you did this and you did that. So in a way, it's Judaism itself that incorporates a police system so that people will follow the law.
Thank
because
you.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, thank you for that interpretation. So Judaism really here is, I think, reminding us of responsibility, right? Of the responsibilities we have to behave in certain ways. And so since we're at our time here, I want to end on a note from Rabbi Amy Eilberg. And this is found in Mishkan HaNefesh, which is the Reform Movement's High Holy Day prayer book, alongside the Unatana Tokef prayer. She writes, this confrontation with mortality, that is Yom Kippur, a confrontation with mortality, she says, can lead us to a sense of dread, despair, and overwhelming grief. At the same time, this recognition can motivate us to embrace the beauty of our lives and to make changes so that we can truly, righteously, and generously live truly, righteously, and generously with the time that remains to us. The goal of the high holidays, perhaps like the goal of life itself, the journey of life itself, is to emerge at the other end as a more righteous and godly person, more conscious of life's fragility and beauty, and more grateful for the blessings of life. So I appreciate the readings that everybody's brought to this. There's so much that we don't have control over. What is Judaism trying to teach us here? In a way, not unlike what Ellen said a moment ago, it's trying to remind us that we have responsibility to behave in certain ways. And also, I think that we have agency to behave in certain ways. We may not be able to control who shall live and who shall die, who by fire and who by water, but we do have the ability to react, to make the world better, to build supports through our tshuva, our tefillah, and our tzedakah, through our repentance, our prayer, and our righteous giving. Ultimately, we can act to reduce the severity of the decree, to use the language of the poem, but also to do tikkun, to bring repair into a world where there's so much that we can't control. So I want to thank you all for this discussion. I wish you all a Gemar Chatima Tova. May you be written and sealed for goodness. May we have a meaningful and a peaceful Yom Kippur ahead. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Micah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Gemar Chatima Tova, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.